Good morning, everybody. Glad to have you all here. We've got David Mayo with East Carolina University Miller School of Entrepreneurship with us this morning. He's a faculty member there, and he's also a team member of the Executive Farm Management program that we have here. He's going to be covering the basics of family business succession, and that's one of our core topics for the 2023 program that we've got this year. So with that, I'll turn it over to David, and thank you for being here, and thanks, David, for coming to speak to us today.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Carly. Laura, Matt, welcome. So happy to have you on the webinar today. I know it's a busy time of year for farmers, and I appreciate you taking the time to listen to this. Today, we're going to be covering specifically how to navigate farm succession as a business-first farm. We're not going to be covering any heavy legal topics today. We might touch on a few of those things, but really what we want to think about is how do we do a successful leadership transition in a farm, and what are some of the benefits and advantages, and maybe some of the disadvantages of family farm succession. So let me see if I can share my screen, and we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, is everyone seeing a slide with that says navigating farm succession?
Yes, we are now.
Excellent. Okay, and no other slides on there, just the main slide.
Just the main slide with the tree.
All right, yep. Excellent. Well, this tree is actually pretty special to me. This is on my family farm, and I grew up we had the field right next to it was about half coastal Bermuda hay and about half other crops. Typically, we would have either tobacco or peanuts on that land right there. So I grew up walking over and sitting in the shade of this tree, and we did not have successful farm transition on my family farm. My grandfather passed away when I was young, and a few years later, my father passed away, and there was no one to pass that knowledge on. I went to college and became a professor, but I still live right there, kind of in the shadow of this tree on the family farm. I'm the fifth generation on the farm. So my kids are sixth generation living on the land anyway. So this is kind of why I have a passion for helping farmers and thinking about farm succession, because with a few facts being a little bit different, I'd be thinking about how to transition a farm to my children, and thinking about how I would be taking it over from my father and grandfather. So today we want to review the current state of farm succession. Is it going well for most farmers? Is it not going well? We want to understand these terms: business first versus family first farm. Which one are you, and which one should you be? We want to think about succession as a driver for innovation on farms. So most people, when they think about family farms, they think about nepotism and all of the negatives that are associated with generational transfer, not picking the right person. But we're gonna talk about how actually this could be a great driver of innovation. And we want to learn some best practices that have been researched through some of the academic programs across the country on generational transition. So what are the things we need to do and take away? And hopefully you leave with some practical steps on what you can do on your farm. If you have questions, for some reason I can't see the chat box. If you don't mind, just hit the little hand raise thing on your screen, or just speak out and stop me as we're going through. So I want to point out that this is a big concern for family farms across the country. Farmers are aging. Those over the age of 65 outnumber those under 35 5 to 1. That's a pretty staggering statistic. It parallels some of the statistics that you see on just general aging population, but it's much, much worse um, when you look at farms. So some young people aren't going into farming, and we're in a situation where farmers are starting to age out, and they don't necessarily have family members to pass the farm along to. This one's really interesting. Farmers recognize that there's a problem. Almost all farmers say that succession planning is super important. If they don't think it's important, it might be because maybe they don't want their family to go into farming. But only 20% of farmers are doing transitional planning. So that leaves a big opportunity. So this is where I think we have a lot of room for improvement in farms. I think the reason that this is happening is because everything that pops up in your day is immediately pressing. So if there's rain coming, you know you have to get crops in. You can't stop and do generational transition planning because you're trying to get your crops in before it rains. You know you've got to order your seeds and your chemicals. That can't wait. And before you know it, each one of those things stacks on another until we haven't had an opportunity in our entire careers to step back and do the type of planning that we need. And because we haven't been doing that planning, farms aren't surviving through the generations. Second generation survival's around 30%. Third generation is at 12, and fourth generation is only at 3%, meaning very few are successful in that transition. Now, I think some of this is because of consolidation in agriculture. We don't need as many farms to do high level production. It doesn't take as many as it did in the past to do the same level of production because of mechanization and increases in efficiency. But I still think it points to a problem and a larger potential problem on the horizon with fewer people going into ag, and we're kind of leveling out on the mechanization through harvest and many areas. So less labor might be needed, but we're kind of at the point where management's needed. 70% of land is going to change hands in the next 20 years. So, that's a large majority of land in the country is going to go from one generation to the next. 77% of that land is going to transfer to relatives. So most of the land in the country in the next 20 years is going to transfer hands, which is obvious when you look at that statistic of farmers over 65 outnumbering farmers under 35. They're getting older. They have to transition it. This is important. Everyone recognizes that it's important, but we actually have to do something about it. And family farms tend more than 93% of U.S. farmland. Most of our farms, almost all of our farms, are family-owned businesses. A lot of what I teach is to family businesses of all types, not just farmers. And what we see in performance across industries, because farms are pretty much dominated by family businesses, so there's not quite as much data here for farms. There's a lot of data for family business outperformance if there are family members involved. Not only that, they outperform on stock price, they outperform on sales, they outperform on net income, and the more family members that are involved, the higher the performance of the family firm, which is surprising for most people. I think this also translates into agriculture, although there's not as much data to support it because so many are family businesses already. But I think we have a huge opportunity, and let's talk about some of the reasons why we might be better than non-family operations. So we have what's termed patient capital, and that is we're looking out for multiple generations, and we're trying to save and preserve that land and that lifestyle through our children or our grandchildren, which means we have different financial goals from those who are looking to increase their quarterly earnings in the short term. So if you're a typical small business or someone who's received external capital, you're trying to perform on a quarterly basis to increase your stock price if you're a publicly traded company, or increase output for your investors in the short term. So we can take a longer term horizon on that. That is renewed and regenerated with innovative practices from younger generations as the farm moves forward. So you kind of get the best of both worlds. You get the innovation and the connection to current markets and current opportunities through the younger generation, and you get the experience and the knowledge of the older generation. And if it's working well, the older generation can mentor the younger generation on those things. Younger generation can mentor the older generation on where opportunity exists in the marketplace and new technologies being developed. So that if you're doing the generational transfer process correctly, you are going to have to more formalize your operation in order to make that transfer successful. More formalized operations mean processes are in place that are going to be industry best practices that drive success. So just the fact of going through a generational transformation increases the success of the farm. So that's the case of why this is important. It's important for your financial performance, and it's important for the longevity of the business. Everyone recognizes it's important, but we're probably not doing enough if you follow the statistics on what we need to do for generational transition. This field started pretty heavily back in the late 70s, early 80s, and this is one of the first tools that was developed to look at how there's interaction between different stakeholders in the farm or in the business. And those three stakeholders are ownership, family, and business. This map is going to look different for every operation, but each one of these stakeholders has something to gain, and there's overlap between each one of these. So I think we'll send out these PowerPoints afterwards, right, Michael and Carly? So you'll have access to some of these tools. But for right now, feel free to screenshot this diagram. And as we're talking, go ahead and fill out for your farm where different people would fall. Are they family only? Do they own part of the business only? Or are they just part of the business? So these would be workers and managers that aren't part of the family and don't own the business, salaried people. This is family members. These are family members who work in the business. These are family members who don't work in the business. So some of the family members might not have a stake or interest in the business, but it still may be important for them to one day be owners and get the financial benefit. So this is a good tool to help you think about all of the stakeholders and where they might be. After you understand who the stakeholders are, it starts to become a little bit easier to think about their needs and what we need to do for successful transition between these circles. So are there family members who will one day move into working at the business? Is there no successor available? And so we have non-family members who may need to move into ownership. What are the next steps in your situation? This is a really helpful tool. So my goal is for each of you to be a business first business. So the best way for you to manage the farm is to focus on the business aspects first. When you think about this in the long term, this is better for the family as well. Here's some characteristics of being business first. So if your position and title are earned and they're not a birthright. So if you're earning your position, that means there are qualifications that you have to meet, and you're going to have the most qualified successor. And you hope that that most qualified successor is a family member, but it may not be. But it forces you to set up a pathway for those family members that if they want to be in management and in a leadership role, there are steps that they have to take. If they don't take those steps, a non-family member would be the one to step in. They still may end up with ownership. And if they end up with ownership and there's a more qualified manager, they're still going to get a higher financial return as being family members. They're just not going to be the ones running the business. You have to give clear pathways to positions for the family in order for them to understand how to move into that leadership role. So there has to be clear communication. Receiving some level of ownership or financial benefit should happen over time and not happen at time of death. So that ownership in the farm is viewed as something to be shared before the time of executing a will in the estate. That's going to motivate current family members or employees to work harder, to feel like they have an ownership stake. And I've noticed in farming, this is not typical. This is pretty atypical. Many farmers that I know, they own the farm until they die, and then it's passed on. But you can imagine a situation where if someone's born when the owner is 20 years old, they live to 95, they don't get any ownership of the family farm until they're in their mid 70s. That doesn't really make any sense, right? So thinking about the business as a business and something that can be ownership that can be transferred as a tool for incentives and for rewards. You're going to have to formalize a lot of things in order to get to that point where that makes sense. So that may be your ownership structure. It may be processes. What does success look like at your family firm? If you can't measure what success looks like, how are you going to know if the successor is doing a good job at it or not? If you're in the older generation that's thinking about leaving this to the next generation, remember, if they're not prepared, some of that falls on you and how you develop that successor. Remember, if you're in the younger generation, if you're not prepared, most of that falls on you for not taking the steps to be ready to be able to take on different responsibilities at the farm. It's a shared responsibility. Here's a checklist. I want you to take just a couple minutes and read through these and keep count of how many of these are true for your family farm. I'm going to pause here for just a couple minutes. Actually, I'll read through them and just keep a tally. How many of these apply to your farm? The farm only promotes leaders from the family. In other words, there's no non-family leaders. There's a strong emotional attachment to the farm and land. Hierarchy is based off of age or seniority. And this means more than skill. The oldest son is expected to lead the farm. The farm money is the same as family money. The assets are purchased for family members by the farm. A lot of farmers that I know, kids drive really nice trucks, even before they're out of high school. Where are they getting the money for those trucks? Well, it's being written out of the farm check because you can make a tax write-off for it, right? Pay is not based on performance. There's no official annual performance evaluation. Family members are all paid about the same. So if you have different people in different roles, their pay is about the same. Children have a job if they want it, regardless of skill or where they are in their professional lives. And then the last one, conflict is avoided. These are typical of family first farms. Now, that doesn't mean that if you click one of these boxes, you're a family first farm. So I just want you to kind of get a sense of how many of these boxes that you check. For me, I have a strong emotional attachment to the land and farm that where we live. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's a motivator for me. But in general, these tend to correlate more with family first operations instead of business first operations. Now let's do the same thing. Hopefully you have a number. Let's do the same thing with business first operations. Leadership is awarded based off of performance. So if you do a good job, you end up getting promoted. And once you meet those skills, you move up quickly. Job descriptions are documented for different positions on the farm. Who's doing what and what is everyone's responsibility? Leadership development plans are formalized for family members. In other words, what do you have to do in order to move into a leadership role? Family members receive compensation and distributions. So they know what they're going to get paid, or they're receiving an annual distribution based off of the success of the farm. There is a non-family member that is higher paid than a family member. This is an interesting indicator. So if you're rewarding the best people, and many times on a farm, you will find that there's going to be someone who's key that is going to be entitled to more compensation than other family members who haven't earned that position yet. There is a family employment policy. So when do we hire a family member, and for what reasons? This is where you state that you hire family members based off of their level of competence and their ability to execute on a job position, not just because they're family. Many family farms that are highly successful will require family members to work somewhere else before they're eligible for employment on the farm, on the family farm. The best candidate is hired for each position, regardless of family status. There are regular leadership meetings, formalized leadership meetings, not just, we run into each other on the way on the way out in the morning. Are there regular leadership meetings? Job performance is evaluated and communicated. This should be happening more often than annually, but annually is at least a step. Shares are transferred between generations before death as a reward or incentive. Okay. Hopefully you have a number on this one as well. You can screenshot this. This gives you kind of some idea of, do you lean more family first or do you lean more business first? I'd be willing to bet that everyone who's on today probably checked boxes in both of these categories. So which way do you lean, and where are the opportunities for you to become more successful? You're probably not going to have a 10 and a 10, or maxing out each side of the scale. Talk about some best practices. So one of the things that we can do is we can think about control versus ownership of the farm separately. Ownership may be something that you get because you're a family member. This is because most wealth and most generational wealth is tied up in the assets of any family business, but especially in high capital intensive operations like family farms. So it's likely that your family farm, the land, the equipment, that eats up most of the family wealth and is the store for most of the family wealth. And so if you're thinking about how to set up your children or your grandchildren to be financially successful, passing part of the assets of the farm on is probably part of that conversation. There's tools to be able to rein that back in at a later date, such as buy-sell agreements. They're kind of beyond the scope of what we will talk about today. But just because someone gets ownership doesn't mean that you're going to lose control from the core family very quickly. You can set that up so it kind of remains generationally close. Control of the farm is earned. So control would be making decisions. So you may have someone who has ownership but has no control. You may have someone who has control but very little ownership. So that decision should be based off of the competence of the individual and have they moved forward with that leadership development plan that you've developed for them. A good way to do this is splitting up stock between voting and non-voting shares. You can do the same thing with a partnership. So an LLC partnership, you can kind of split up through the partnership agreement who owns what and who can make what decisions. So it's a good way to do that and think about that generational transition over time, not at time of death. So I bet if I asked 1,000 farmers how many of them wanted to work past a normal retirement age, I bet 950 of them would probably say, yeah, they get a lot of energy from going out and working, and they want to keep doing that as long as possible. Very common in our field for farmers to work well past the average retirement age for others. And many will work until the time that they just physically can't work anymore. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is a bad thing if they control the control and ownership of the family farm well past when they should be running that farm. And we could probably all think of examples where we've seen that in the past. We want the leadership, the older leadership, to be able to transition into a mentor role to continue preparing the younger generation and become sound advisors for them as they get into their retirement years and begin letting go of some of that control and ownership. That doesn't mean they have to stop working. It doesn't mean that they're useless. It's quite the opposite of that. They have a whole lot of knowledge that they've developed over the years, so many relationships that they've developed. Need to continue capitalizing on that for the farm, but making sure those relationships and that knowledge moves to the next generation. That's the responsibility of a good leader as they begin to age. Part of their success should be the success of the next generation coming up, and they should be proud of what they've taught the next generation. So here's some way to think about earning shares. So you might think about this being on a performance-based metric for how you have control. So I wrote voting and non-voting, but think about this as control and non-controlling ownership. You might also have performance-based for non-controlling shares or interest. So, as you move through time, you make sure that transition happens. What we haven't talked about is estate tax and estate tax consequences. There are tax advantages for many farms to go ahead and move ownership earlier. Speak with your attorney about methods that you can do that, but it's a good idea both from the business side and from the tax avoidance side. So if they're meeting training goals, so maybe they're progressing through that leadership development plan that you've outlined, that might be a time to incentivize with some controlling interest. Exceeding metrics, so further performance things, and position advancement. So as you move from managing a crew to overseeing a packing house, your job description changed, your responsibility level changed, and that might come with some controlling interest of the farm. You might have non-controlling interest based off of time that someone has worked there. You might think about it as how you avoid estate tax and do some tax planning. That may move through trusts or other mechanisms, but still the ultimate goal to get it to an individual in the next generation. or to give a just some mechanism to deliver financial interest. So, if you have a certain ownership of the farm, maybe that comes with maybe that comes with some lease payments or some further incentive to be able to financially assist those in the next generation. I want you to think about on your family farm, what are some ways that the next generation might be good for them to earn controlling interest or non-controlling interest on your family farm? So list just a couple here. You can write them on a piece of paper in front of you. Try to be as specific as possible as you can with these examples. A couple times so far, we've mentioned the need to develop leaders in different competency areas in order for them to demonstrate their success and for you to measure their success. This is a great way for you to be able to think about how you do that. So you can develop a skills map that will be created for how someone is going to be in a leadership role, any particular leadership role, but specifically if they're going to be the primary person running the farm, this is definitely needed. I think it's needed for all leadership, but it's especially needed for those who are going to one day run the farm. So I've given you an example where I've split this into 5 different areas. Your areas may be a little bit different on your farm. I think these cover some of the primary things you might need to do. So in this one, core leadership and strategy. Are they able to articulate a mission, to define a mission for different types of operations or different crop operations on the farm? Can they make financial decisions? Can they look at kind of where markets are going and make the right crop mix decision? Can they create future strategy for how the farm positions themselves to capture new markets or to capture growing trends? Can they do business modeling? Can they do market forecasting? Are they able to build a culture on the farm? These are all the really hard things. I think these are probably, toward the end before that transition happens, can they do these things? They have to be exposed to them earlier. And then I gave you some examples for management skill. So can you set goals? Can you make sure your employees stay on task for those goals? Can they run the meeting? Can they manage conflict? So instead of the current owner handling all the conflict, can you move that down to the next generation and let them sort out some of that conflict after modeling that for them? Can they manage the managers on the farm? So not just managing their sub area, but can they manage all of the other managers? And can they inspire those employees to do something different than what they've done before? And each one of these things may require special learning or special things to do to gain that skill. Here's a few others that you might think about on your farm. And I left these intentionally blank so that you can write down a few examples of what a successor would need in order to do this. So are there things under legal risk and compliance? So, maybe that's GAP certification or some other certification, maybe chemical certification or something else, maybe some of the HR certifications. Is there core business knowledge and skills? These are the things I typically see successors getting faster on the farm and getting competent at quickly. So this is, how do you grow crops? How do you harvest the crops? When do you do it? What type of seeds do you have to buy? Most farmers are a little bit better at these things and a little bit better at transitioning these things. And then innovation management. What do you have to do to look forward to the future? What sort of investments do you have to consider making? This one can be tricky as well, but is key to the future of the farm. So take just a couple seconds here to think about some of these core areas that may apply to your farm, and fill in a couple of these blanks here. So here's some of the best practices that come out of the family business literature. And a lot of it does apply to farms as well. And there is some farm family succession literature that mirrors this. These are some steps that you might require of a successor. Requiring some level of formal education. So requiring someone to get an undergraduate degree in ag or related field or business, or maybe even requiring a master's degree, depending on the level of the operation and where you want to see it go. That credential can make a big difference. Requiring some experience off the farm. This one's very common. Interestingly, I heard a new paper that came out back in the summer that kind of disputes some of this. So it's been kind of a given for a long time, and there's a lot of research that demonstrates that if you send someone off the farm and have them learn either at a supplier business or someone downstream in the supply chain or at just another farm, that the successor comes back with a lot more skill and a lot more new ideas. I think that's probably true, but there is some new research out that says that's not as strong a correlation as maybe they thought in the past, and that they can get a lot of that developed on the farm if the farm's on the current farm, if the owners are intentional about that training. I still think it's probably a good idea for them to go learn on someone else's dime, and I really like that validation that they get. So if they move up in an organization that isn't yours, it gives some separation between the farm workers and the owner. So when they come back, they may have been working when they were younger as a crew member or as a laborer. When they come back as a professional 5 years later, maybe they've gone to college, maybe they've gotten a couple of years of experience somewhere else. They come back with their own skills that they've developed somewhere else, and usually a lot of good ideas. Requiring executive education. I'm going to give you guys the commercial for executive farm management at the end, but there's some other great leadership programs and continual professional education that successors could take advantage of. You could require certain responsibilities and outcomes for different positions, and then measure those closely for success, and try to develop those until they're very successful in each one of those functional areas. You also have a lot of professional organizations in agriculture, and serving as leadership in some of those professional organizations is going to give great access to others in the field, suppliers, customers, relationships for other farmers who know best practices, those who understand new markets that are emerging, potential cooperative opportunities with others in the field. So, try to get those successors involved in serving in professional organizations as well. Young farmers and ranchers, those sorts of organizations. So I pulled this job description, to think about what are some things that maybe farm managers might need in order to be successful. And if you're going to hire someone on as a family employee, what might they need to do as part of that job description to develop to a level where they're capable. So this could serve as a development plan, but it can also serve as a signal for when you're hiring. Do I hire this family member or do I hire someone else? Could they meet these skills? And this is just one example. You're going to be a lot better at developing this on your own for your own farm. But I highlighted some words that I think are really important for the success in this position. So there's management, there's equipment operation, there's documentation, there's teaching equipment operation, regulations, gap issues, growing schedule planning, training other staff, training temporary staff, probably on safety and things, communication, um, seeds, fertilizer, pesticides, restocking. So it's kind of inventory level stuff, marketing and sale of products that are produced, budgets and financial reports, building professional networks, understanding current developments in ag science, irrigation systems, growing practices, and then being able to work independently without a lot of direction on these things. This continues on the next page with some of the qualifications. So communication skills, being able to write, and bachelor's degree and 5 years equivalent of experience on this particular farm. Willingness to provide input, explore new tasks, and try different approaches, and openness to new ideas. So I pulled this one off of Indeed or somewhere, but you can probably think about, if you're requiring these things of a successor, there's probably some formal level, a formalization of this farm operation that's more than your typical average family farm that we're used to seeing. Just developing to a point where you can implement this and where you're hiring is going to be really transformational for many farms. So I want you to think really quickly about, on your farm, what are some essential duties and responsibilities that you may have for a successor, and what are some of the qualifications that fit for your family farm? So if you go through this process that we've described, being a business first farm, you're gonna buck a lot of these trends and a lot of these perceptions that people have about generational transfer. A lot of people think of it as really rife with conflict. No one ever agrees on anything. But if you do it fairly and you outline the process well, I'm not saying it's going to be easy. This is going to be difficult to get these processes in place. But if you outline a fair process, you're going to have much less conflict involved with that development, because expectations have been outlined and everyone knows what fair looks like. There's a perception that their generation just doesn't understand. And one thing that's really clear from the family business research is this is not true. Each generation brings a unique aspect that is going to make the farm more successful. And we have to recognize which generation has strength in which area, and when to rely on each other to make that success happen. Here's another one. My attorney's handling all of our succession planning. For some of you this may be the first time you've heard an entire family business segment from someone who's not an attorney. And we talk about very few legal documents in this. Those things have those tools are important. It's important to engage a family business attorney who understands your area in ag. But there's a whole lot more to it than that. And I'd argue that even the most important things are the things we talked about today. And if you're doing those, they're going to naturally lead to having the attorney stuff in place, the trust, the wills, the buy-sell agreements. All those things are going to come more naturally if you have processes in place. Here's another one. We have to go through succession pains to see any gains. If you start formalizing your operations in small ways and you start doing some of those things starting today, you're going to see benefits from the start. From day one, you're going to start being more successful by having fair practices outlined and from professionalizing your farm. You don't have to wait years in order to see success here. You're going to have more qualified people sooner by going through the process we outlined. Remember, family businesses outperform, and the reasons that they outperform are things that we talked about earlier today. So, just here's some quick takeaways from what we talked about today. Family businesses tend to have higher ability to innovate, but lower willingness to innovate. That means that the ability is that they can streamline decision making and resource control, meaning you don't have to go through a lot of different layers to make a decision in a family business. Usually, that control is by just a few people. Willingness is represented by if you're not taking feedback from younger generations, typically younger generations, about innovative practices and new trends developing in the field, then you're going to end up seeing stagnation. So even though you have the ability to make change, there's not always a willingness to make change in family farms. So here's some things that increase innovation. Succession, as we've talked about today, does it. Having loyal employees that are going to stick around for a long time, treating the employees right. Organizational support structures, so everyone knowing what their role is and having roles supported. Here's some factors that decrease innovation. Being under-resourced. So if you have a few years of poor financial performance, that can hurt your ability to increase innovation. Generational entrenchment. So, that's basically conflict between generations. Everyone digging in, the younger generation saying, they just don't understand. We have these innovative ideas that I learned from another farm, and we could implement those here. The older generation going, well, that worked on the other farm, but we've tried that here, and it doesn't work, and not getting to some middle ground that makes sense. Here's a quote that I ran across that was a qualitative study where they interviewed about 12 farms. And this is what I thought. This was a really sad statement that one of the senior generation owners said. They said, innovation is not a good thing. And they went on to say, we don't change our way of doing business. And so they're confusing their core principles of their farm with operational practices. Your core values may not change. My family business class, they write a paper about what their values are for the family and what they want to take forward. In my family, it's hard work. We want to get a good education, and we want to be close to our community, our church, and our family. And so, if those are our core values, those values probably aren't going to change through generations. They're important. They're not broken. They don't need fixing. But operational execution has certainly changed a lot in the last few years. And if you look over the course of a generation, they've changed massively. And it's kind of amazing to me that you could have that attitude and still be in business. Innovation is your friend, and it can shore up your business and make sure you move into the future. In many cases, innovation can be lost in later generations. It's the we've always done it this way mentality. There's actually some neurology research that shows why people become less innovative as they get older, and it's pretty interesting. There's actually some chemistry in the brain that causes that. In many other cases, younger generations have new ideas that they would like to implement. They're not all good ideas. So this is another interesting point. There are many times where their ideas are not good ideas. And that's where you have to rely on an open-minded senior generation to be able to guide them on which ideas will work and which ideas may not work. I'd start with a yes mentality and figure out why no is the outcome, instead of starting with no and trying to figure out why yes is the outcome. Well-trained successors are going to be good stewards because they're going to see the success that they've built based off of the leadership of previous generations, and they're going to want to move that forward into later generations. And then your values will continue through succession. So, if you raise someone right, they're going to keep the same values that you had, and it's going to continue your legacy. take just a minute or so and think about some of your key takeaways from what we've talked about today. Now, I want you to imagine what a great future state looks like for succession on your farm. What's your desired outcome? You can come back and write them. Think about them right now. What are some steps that I need to do in order to make that future a reality? And so this is probably the most important slide. We've covered a lot of information, but this is your takeaway that I want you to take today. What is it that you need to do right away in order to make that future a reality? Are there some small steps? Is it writing a job description for a position? Is it writing down a leadership expectation plan? In the short term, we're coming up on winter and it's going to start slowing down for many of us. This is a great time for you to be able to write down some of these takeaways and start implementing them today. Remember, you can start seeing benefit immediately. You don't have to wait for years for succession to see benefits. All right, I'm going to give you a brief commercial on our executive farm management program. This is some of what we did over at the 2022 program. There's still time to sign up for our 2023 program. So it's going to start in January. This is designed for large farms in the Southeast and beyond to strengthen their operations in several core areas. One of those core areas is financial. One is those innovative practices. We're going to use a tool that is very common in the venture capital world called the business model canvas. You see that business model canvas in this in both of these pictures here. So a lot of the work is going to be used on how do we take this farm from being a price taker, a commodity producer, to a price maker, where we add value and be able to capture some of that value to make the farm more successful. Another area is the topic we talked about today, farm succession. And then our fourth area that we cover is human resource development, which I think ties really well to some of that farm successor development. Here's some of the topic areas that we cover. We have expert core faculty members from Georgia, from Clemson, from East Carolina, from NC State, and those from private industry as well, who come in with knowledge of strategic planning and human resource development. We've really assembled an expert team here. This program started about 6 years ago. I've been involved since the beginning, and it's been one of the most rewarding things that I've done in my career, being able to work with some of the most successful farmers. The network that you'll build during the program is excellent. The guest speakers are unbelievable. We had Amazon Fresh come in last year, and one of the asks they made is they said, if any of you can be suppliers for us, you go through the program and get in contact with us, and we want to get you on board as a supplier, because they know the quality of the folks that we're working with in the program by now. So, I mean, it really is just an incredible program, and I'd love to have all of you involved. We're kind of running out of time. So I'm going to take off the screen share and see if we have any questions to close it out.